solemn convictions on this matter, I now declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere so long as other states do not do so. We will not be the first to resume. Such a declaration is no substitute for a formal binding treaty, but I hope it will help us achieve one. In the world, who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world? Let them come to Berlin. There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. The kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. Peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. Wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the word, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Against blacks in Birmingham a month earlier, here was President Kennedy's history-making speech to the country, endorsing civil rights.
If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay?
Integrated the University of Alabama today. 2 Negroes were admitted, but only after Governor George Wallace had carried out his symbolic threat to stand in the schoolhouse door.
I would ask you once again to responsibly step aside, and if you do not, I'm going to assure you that the orders of those courts will be enforced.
Shortly after Governor Wallace carried out his promise to block the doorway, President Kennedy ordered the Secretary of Defense then to use military force.
And solemn convictions on this matter, I now declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere so long as other states do not do so. We will not be the first to resume. Such a declaration is no substitute for a formal binding treaty, but I hope it will help us achieve one. Nor would such a treaty be a substitute for disarmament, but I hope it will help us achieve it.
You know, that nervous background came President Kennedy. I discovered it years ago, but here's a president in the middle of the worst part of the Cold War, just coming off the Cuban Missile Crisis, saying it doesn't have to be this way.
That's right, and if you're making a case for Kennedy as a courageous president, that speech has a lot to do with it, because just think, Chris, if he had given that speech, let's say, 10 years earlier during the McCarthy era, I think a president would almost have been impeached for saying just those things.
For peace, yes. And the idea of opening up his arms, and even in that speech of Michael Duffy, he said, for the first time in American history, something that's nothing to us, but everything to the Russian people. You guys won the Second World War. You lost 20 million people in your patriotic struggle, and you deserve credit for that.
he reached out to the Soviet people, the Soviet government. He was sort of dealing from a good deck. He had some reason to think that Khrushchev needed some help here in maybe moving from a Cold War to a warmer situation, a more peaceful situation. Kennedy got tired of hearing from his own generals in the first 2 years in office about how casually we might be able to lose 20 or 30 million people in a nuclear exchange. He was horrified.
So it was like
this.
Dr. Strangelove.
It was exactly that. He thought that the conversation, the rhetoric was way too hot. And by the middle of '63, he was saying, why can't we talk about something positive? Why can't we talk about peace instead of war? Why can't we talk about things we can do rather than just giving speeches about things we can't do? And so he goes to AU on this really hot June day, and he says, here's one step we can take. And he knew that the Soviets were ready for something like that. He had some indications from Khrushchev that he might warm to it, and so he laid on the unilateral step of not testing nuclear devices as a first step towards some kind of peace.
And it was in the atmosphere because we couldn't determine whether people were testing underground. And Michael, I'm older than you guys. I remember strontium-90 and mothers worried about giving milk to their children that had the radiation in it because it was in the atmosphere those days.
And kids were told not to eat the snow because there was strontium-90 in that too. So this is something that people were really living with. But Kennedy also knew that saying these things, the Russians had been saying to him privately, if you really want to start winding down the Cold War, why don't you say things in public such as that we were the ones that really were responsible for that victory? Kennedy, for the first time.
And this was such a good speech in terms of beginning some kind of détente with the Soviets. Khrushchev had allowed this to be played in the Soviet Union speech.
They printed it in Pravda, and Izvestia ran it, and he got a word from Khrushchev very quickly that Khrushchev himself had been impressed by it and wanted to go further.
Well, let's take a look at the big part. Here's the crucial unilateral offer he made that day about limiting testing in the atmosphere.
To make clear our good faith and solemn convictions on this matter, I now declare that the United States does not propose to conduct nuclear tests in the atmosphere.
Come on, man.
With the Soviets, Khrushchev had allowed this to be played in the Soviet Union speech.
They printed it in Pravda, and Izvestia ran it, and he got a word from Khrushchev very quickly that Khrushchev himself had been impressed by it and wanted to go further.
Well, let's take a look at the big.
This is an interview with someone that actually saw John Kennedy in Argentina in a motor. Okay, boom. Stop again. Costa Rica. This is a live interview with someone that actually saw President Kennedy in a motorcade in Costa Rica. Your name is?
Mario Pacheco.
And tell us about your experience with JFK.
Venía caminando por la calle. Yo no esperaba ver al presidente Kennedy, ni me imaginaba ser el presidente Kennedy. De repente vi que venía un montón de gente, venía policía, venía una caravana de carros. Entonces me acerqué un poco. Yo diría que estaba a la distancia de él a unos 50 metros. Y de pronto vi al presidente Kennedy pasando un carro destapado. Yo me sorprendí muchísimo porque no estaba enterado de lo que iba a pasar. Pero sí, a mí me impresionó mucho.
This amalgamation between the mob and the saw. The moment gunfire exploded, the piercing echoes through Dealey Plaza.
The flag. This is an interview with someone that actually saw John Kennedy in Argentina in a motor. Okay, boom. Stop again. Costa Rica. This is a live interview with someone that actually saw President Kennedy in a motorcade in Costa Rica. Your name is?
Mario Pacheco.
And tell us about your experience with JFK.
Venía caminando por la calle. Yo no esperaba ver al presidente Kennedy, ni me imaginaba ser el presidente Kennedy. De repente vi que venía un montón de gente, venía policía, venía una caravana de carros. Entonces me acerqué un poco. Yo diría que estaba a la distancia de él a unos 50 metros. Y de pronto vi al presidente Kennedy pasando un carro destapado. Yo me sorprendí muchísimo porque no estaba enterado de lo que iba a pasar. Pero sí, a mí me impresionó mucho.
This amalgamation between the mob and the silent saw. The moment gunfire exploded, the piercing echoes through Dealey Plaza.
The flag.
Oswald acted alone.
Could he have survived this first one?
Very room where Vice President Johnson took the oath of office, and this is the very place where he stood. Now, as we move back toward the rear of the aircraft, you can see that the seats are kind of tight, but that's because this was a working aircraft. It flew for the Air Force and carrying presidents and VIPs for 36 years. A long career, and now it has a new career here at the National Museum. As we go a little bit further back, we come to an area which is the galley, where the presidential meals were prepared. But then we also see the series of seats at the very back. These very 4 seats are the ones that the air crew pulled out to move out of the way, and they took a saw and cut the bulkhead just along here to make sure there was room, and they brought the president's casket in and brought it in and laid it along here. And this is where Mrs. Kennedy sat on that fateful day on that terrible flight back from Dallas to Washington, D.C.
Jeff Underwood, thank you very much. President Kennedy.
Did you put that down there?
Yeah. I put that down there 19 years ago.
Robert Roden grew up in New York and moved to Dallas almost 20 years ago. President Kennedy's body before striking Texas Governor John Connally.
This could have been an